This is the homicide rate in El Salvador from 2014 to 2022. According to the latest statistics, in 2022, El Salvador recorded a homicide rate of approximately 8 per 100,000 inhabitants. This marks a significant improvement from 2015, when the murder rate was alarmingly high at 103. Since then, the country has been steadily reducing its homicide rate year after year. This positive trend results from the Salvadorian government's efforts to tackle violence and organized crime and implement various social programs to prevent crime and improve its citizens' well-being. Such a success will influence regional crime. However, as with everything, the victory over crime comes at a price. So watch this to know more about how El Salvador has made it and how its example can influence the region. Now here is a little bit of context. El Salvador is a small Central American nation that spent decades embroiled in some of the most intense spates of violence in the Western Hemisphere. There are three main organized crime groups: Mara Salvatrucha, or MS-13, and the two factions of 18th Street, or Barrio 18, which were hostile to each other and the local law enforcement. The gangs were also invasive and extremely violent, controlling entire communities throughout the country and subjecting urban dwellers to extortion and murder. Although various governments of El Salvador follow the so-called mano dura, or iron fist crackdown policy that included widespread arrests and increasingly draconian laws, the crime was not really dropping, and the problem seemed impossible to solve. In the 2000s, several governments in El Salvador implemented a program of heavy-handed security measures. These measures were known as mano dura, a term coined by the administration of former President Francisco Flores Perez, and later super mano dura by his successor Antonio Saca. The strategy primarily involved increasing police presence and rounding up gang members en masse with the hope of reducing violence in the short term. However, despite some initial success, this approach failed to curb the spread of gang activity or disrupt their criminal enterprises. Moreover, the mass incarceration of gang members led to unintended consequences. Weak security and overcrowding in prisons allowed these gangs to thrive and strengthen their ranks. The gangs developed a more hierarchical and disciplined structure and began to organize criminal activities from behind bars. Consequently, violence persisted and even escalated in the 2010s, prompting the government to rethink its approach. In early 2012, the administration of then-President Mauricio Funes brokered a ceasefire with the two main gangs, the MS-13 and the two Barrio 18 factions, known as the Revolucionarios and the Serenos. The government promised to transfer gang leaders from maximum security prisons to lower security facilities in exchange for a reduction in violence. Although the ceasefire was initially successful in decreasing violence, it eventually broke down and gang activity resumed. However, the strategy of negotiating with gang leaders marked a significant departure from the previous approach, which relied on brute force and suggested a willingness to explore alternative solutions to the problem of street gangs. However, in 2019, Nayib Bukele won the presidential elections and things have drastically changed. Bukele positioned himself as a new and different kind of leader who would not repeat his predecessor's corruption, incompetence, and political failures. On the first day of his administration, he gathered Salvadorans and declared that they were starting a new chapter in their history, one that would be marked by collaboration and mutual support. He recognized that tough times were ahead and that he would need the cooperation and understanding of the Salvadorian people to make difficult decisions and steer the country forward. This statement shows that the politician was aware of the challenges that lay ahead and was willing to work with the people to overcome them. But how Bukele's policy differed from his predecessors, as every administration in El Salvador was strict against gangs. In March 2022, his administration launched an unprecedented crackdown on the gangs operating in the country, which has been ongoing for the past 20 months. This involved implementing a state of emergency, known as a régime d'exception, which granted the government sweeping powers to combat gang-related crime. Since the crackdown began, the government has made significant progress in arresting a large number of street-level gang members and their collaborators. The government has also managed to disrupt the gang's communication networks, which has severely hindered their ability to manage their illegal extortion and drug trafficking businesses, the primary source of their revenue. Moreover, the crackdown has disrupted the gang's command structure and organizational hierarchies, making it difficult for them to mount a collective and organized response. As a result, the gangs have been left in disarray, struggling to regain their footing in the face of the government's successful security policies. Many analysts have been left wondering why these mano dura security policies have suddenly succeeded after years of failure. The efficiency of the government's crackdown has been remarkable, and its impact on gang-related crime has been significant. The critical aspects of the policy are the use of extreme legal measures, a looser interpretation of gang affiliation, and the concentration of political power around the Bukele administration. As mentioned, Bukele enforced the state of emergency, a legal measure designed for temporary use in response to catastrophic events such as earthquakes and pandemics. No government has taken measures to such a level. However, in March 2022, a series of brutal gang murders took the lives of 87 people, convinced legislators who were aligned with President Bukele to approve his request to enact a one-month state of emergency. Justice and Security Minister Gustavo Villatoro recently announced that there were 154 murders committed last year, which is a significant drop from 495 murders committed the year before. This implied that the homicide rate stands at 2.4 per every 100,000 individuals. Villatoro says this rate is the lowest in the Americas, excluding Canada. However, it is essential to note that the emergency laws have deprived Salvadorians of fundamental constitutional rights, including the right to legal defense and freedom of movement. These laws have also loosened arrest rules, allowing the state to intercept civilian communications. While this approach has advantages, it also raises concerns about violating human rights and the potential for abuse of power. Nevertheless, the emergency powers ordered the police to arrest more than 77,000 suspects without warrants. Moreover, Bukele even went on to create a mega prison to house many of these suspects, which has led to a surge in the number of people incarcerated in El Salvador. In February of last year, the government of El Salvador initiated a new correctional facility known as the Center for the Confinement of Terrorism, or CECOT. This facility is designed to house up to a staggering 40,000 prisoners and is considered to be a mega prison. The CECOT consists of 8 buildings, each housing 32 large cells. The primary objective of this prison is to hold and confine inmates convicted of acts of terrorism. Recently, around 2,000 alleged members of the notorious MS-13 gang were transferred to CECOT. This move has further increased the number of people incarcerated, which currently amounts to more than 1% of the country's population. Despite facing criticism for the alleged disregard of human rights, Nayib Bukele emerged victorious in recent presidential elections. The tribunal announced that the outcome, which declared that Bukele had secured a massive 82.66% of the overall support. This translated to receiving a staggering 2.7 million votes out of the 3.2 million cast. What's more, Bukele's popularity soared even higher than the previous election in 2019, with his support increasing by over 1 million votes. Meanwhile, Manuel Flores, representing the far-left Farabundo Marti National Liberation Front, or FMLN, lagged far behind in second place with a mere 6.25% of the vote. Joel Sanchez, who represented the right-wing Arena Party, came in third with a total of 5.44% of the votes. As a result, several Latin American leaders have expressed admiration for the policies implemented by Nayib Bukele. For instance, in Honduras, President Xiomara Castro, who is affiliated with the left wing, recently announced her own crackdown on gangs, which has been compared to the measures taken in El Salvador. Meanwhile, in Guatemala, former right-wing presidential candidate Zuri Rios has praised El Salvador as a model for reference in terms of its efforts to address gang violence and crime. These developments suggest that Bukele's initiatives have sparked interest among leaders in neighboring countries grappling with similar challenges. Bukele's aggressive approach, which involves rounding up suspected gang members and imprisoning them indefinitely, has led to a significant reduction in crime rates and has made the streets of El Salvador much safer, at least for the time being. However, there are concerns that this approach may not be sustainable in larger countries with stronger judiciaries, as it would require prosecuting, convicting, and imprisoning a much larger proportion of the population. For example, if Brazil were to adopt a similar approach and attempt to incarcerate 1.7% of its population, it would have to prosecute, convict, and jail an astounding 3.6 million people, which would be an enormous challenge even for a country with a robust legal system. Ultimately, Bukele's policy proved effective as El Salvador managed to decimate crime rates, leading to his growing popularity. However, whether such extraordinary measures would work in other countries in the region is another story.